What's up everybody, and welcome back to the Cyclonic Thrift channel. Hope you guys are excited about today's commander as I am. It's a new one, well, quote-unquote new one from the Ravnica Remastered set. It's Lazav the Multifarious, blue and a black for a 1/3 legendary creature shapeshifter. When it enters the battlefield, we surveil 1. And then we can pay X and have it become a copy of target creature card in our graveyard with mana cost X. Except its name is Lazav, it's legendary, and it has this ability. So, usually I do like a decent introduction to whatever commander we're going to be looking at in the video, kind of go through the strategies of what we're trying to do. This commander, I am just pumped to be a toolbox strategy, where we just fill the deck with a bunch of creatures that have different effects. We'll be able to turn Lazav into whichever one is in our graveyard at the moment, whichever one works best for the situation, and just generate a ton of fun value. And there's going to be a lot of very cool, very interesting interactions with this ability that I'm excited to get into. So without further ado, let's do it. So the first section here is cards that have a combat damage trigger. Right, as ways to, when we attack with Lazav, when he's not blocked, we can turn him into whatever these creatures are and get the combat trigger value without having the actual card on the battlefield. So, for example, Creedle of Baldur's Gate is blue and a black for a 1/3 human elf rogue. When he deals combat to a player, that player loses 1 life and mills a card. Then you gain life and scry 1. And then whenever you attack, you can pay 2. If you do, target creature can't be blocked this turn. So if we want to make Lazav unblockable, we need to get through a bunch of blockers. We also have that versatility. But this combat damage is pretty low to the ground, right? It's a 2 mana effect, basically. But it'll be a way to add to the life loss for our opponents and just give us better card draws with the scry. A slightly more impactful effect will be from Yuriko, the Tiger's Shadow. So 1 a blue and a black for a 1/3 human ninja. Whenever a ninja you control deals combat damage to a player, you reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. So it's a card draw. And then each opponent loses life equal to that card's mana value. So if anybody's ever played against a Yuriko deck, you know how scary this ability can be. And even though we're not going to be manipulating the top of our deck in the same way that you would for a Yuriko deck, the incidental damage off of this thing is going to be pretty sweet. Not to mention it's also a card draw. So being able to do this for 3 mana whenever we want, super helpful. And the last card here is Raving Dead, 4 and a black for 2/6 zombie, has death touch. At the beginning of combat on your turn, choose an opponent at random. Raving Dead attacks that player this combat if able, and then when he deals combat damage to a player, that player loses half of his or her life rounded down. So that first paragraph here where you're choosing an opponent at random at the beginning of combat, that's meant to kind of be the downside to the ability here, because losing half of a player's life is insane. But if we wait, we go through the beginning of combat with Lazav, we don't turn him into Raving Dead yet, and then we go to our Declare Attacker step and then turn him into Raving Dead, we don't have to choose randomly. We get to pick and choose which player we attack, right? And conceivably, it's the player that doesn't have anything to block us with. And so we'll be able to get that combat damage in, get that trigger, get that ability, and have them lose half their life. The second category here, I put in a bunch of creatures that have specific keywords, right? Specific abilities, things that will be able to either protect or improve Lazav's chances of surviving or attacking or whatever we need to in that moment. It's kind of a permanent / consistent protection for Lazav. So for Invisible Stalker, right, 1 and a blue for a 1/1 human rogue, has hexproof and can't be blocked. So hexproof is really the main thing here, where we're able to, in response to anybody targeting our guy, turn him into Invisible Stalker, becomes hexproof, negates any ability that they have. not being able to be blocked is also super helpful and can definitely be used in some of our combat tricks. But that hexproof is really what we're looking for here. In a similar vein, we have Dark Steel Mirror. It's 3 mana for a 0/1 mirror, and it's indestructible. That's it. So we are looking to get this in our graveyard, and for 3 mana, we can make Lazav indestructible whenever we want. Response to board wipes, response to target removal, anything like that. You know, if we get surprised and he ends up getting blocked by a creature that's going to kill him, then we can also make him indestructible. It's just, again, a way to protect our guy. And then Kefnet the Mindful. It's a 2 and a blue for a 5/5 god, flying and indestructible. Same exact vein. Can also turn him into a much better blocker this way, right? The flying and indestructible there. But ultimately, it's just about protecting Lazav, making sure he stays on the battlefield as long as we can. And then we've got a few cards here that are not supposed to be here. And by that I mean cards that, you know, that have such a large downside that they're not supposed to be played in Commander, unless you have a very specific way to take advantage of them, as we do here. So the first is Zareth San the Trickster. It's 3, a blue and a black for a 4/4 Merfolk Rogue. Yeah, it's a 5 mana flash, which is great, but he doesn't have haste or anything like that. We're not supposed to take advantage of his combat damage trigger like this, similar to Raving Dead. But when he deals combat damage to a player, we put target permanent card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. Right, so we're stealing something from our opponents. For 5 mana, we get to do this for free whenever Lazav attacks and deals combat damage. Not supposed to happen. The next one here is Eater of Days, which is a 4 mana 9/8 Leviathan with flying and trample. Insane. Not your typical magic card creature. And that's because when it comes into play, you skip your next 2 turns. Right? That's the type of thing where, like, yeah, you get to play this turn 4, conceivably, maybe turn 3, but then you skip the next 2 turns before you can really use this 9/8 flying trampler. However, if we make Lazav into a copy of it, it's not coming into play. It's already in play, because Lazav is already in play. So for 4 mana, we turn Lazav into a 9/8 flying trampler, without the downside of losing our 2 turns. And in a very similar vein, we also have the Leveler. It's a 5 mana 10/10 artifact creature, and when it comes into play, you remove your library from the game. You exile your library, which in any game is not good, right? So thankfully, with this ability, right, we don't have to do that. We just turn Lazav into a 10/10 for 5 mana, deal 10 damage to a player. Yeah. Another good thing to note with Lazav's ability is he's still Lazav the Multifarious. He's still our commander, so this is all counts for commander damage. So we basically get a player halfway dead by turning this guy into the Leveler whenever we want. But then we have to get to the veggie portion of the deck, and usually I'm very excited about talking about the veggies, the ramp, the card draw, the removal, the things that we need in our deck to make it run smoothly and to help it compete with the higher power cards and higher power decks at our table. For this deck, I was less excited because I love the playing around with different abilities. I just wanted to put as many creatures in here with different abilities as possible to bring about as many different interactions as possible. But I am a consistent deck builder. I'm trying to set a good example for everybody. So without further ado, let's get into the ramp section of the veggies. Starting out with Arcane Signet, 2 mana for an artifact. You tap it to add a mana of any color and a commander's color identity. Super easy, super simple. Commander's Sphere, it's 3 mana for basically the same thing, except you can also sacrifice it to draw a card. Again, super simple. And then Hedron Archive is a 4 mana artifact. You tap to add 2 mana of any color, and you can pay 2 to tap it, sacrifice it, and draw 2 cards. Pretty nice. For card draw, a lot of it is based off of our our combat damage, right? So Mischievous Catgeist is 1 in a blue. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. Either it does that, or you turn Lazav into it, right, with its ability, and you draw a card that way. Alright, and the next card here is Ever-Watching Threshold. It's 2 in a blue for an enchantment. Whenever an opponent attacks you and or a planeswalker you control with 1 or more creatures, draw a card. So this is the card draw version of a kind of a sub-theme of this deck, right? Because we're kind of running a Voltron-y 1 creature attacking strategy, we do want to make sure that our opponents don't attack us willy-nilly. We're very vulnerable to going wide. And so we want to make sure that if our opponents decide to attack us with their creatures, right, then we get some value out of it. So this is just an excellent way to dissuade them, but if they do decide to come in anyway, then we can draw some cards and get some value out of it. And then a kind of a unique way of getting some cards here is the Elder Brain. It's 5 and 2 black for a 6/6 horror. It has Menace, and whenever it attacks, you exile all cards from that player's hand, and they draw that many cards. And then you can play lands and cast spells from among the exiled cards for as long as they remain exiled. So essentially, when you attack a player with this creature, you get their hand, basically. It becomes essentially a second hand. Right, you play lands from it, you cast spells from it, whatever. Either, we have this on the battlefield and attack out with it, or we have Lazav become a copy of it before combat, and then when it attacks, we get the trigger. Whichever way we end up wanting to do it, we're going to get a lot of value from it. Getting an entire person's hand is a super efficient way for card draw, right? 4, 5, 6 cards at a time. And then for removal, we've got cards like Feed the Swarm, 1 in a black for a sorcery, destroy target creature and enchantment and opponent controls, lose life equal to that permanent's mana value. Pilfered Plans is 1, a blue and a black for a sorcery. You have target player put the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, and then you draw 2 cards. We'll be choosing ourselves for that, right? We'll want to mill those cards to get more creatures in our graveyard, and then draw 2 cards from there. And then Winds of Rebuke is 1 in a blue for an instant. You return target non-land permanent from to its owner's hand, and then each player puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So, kind of removal for something else, and then we get to mill 2 cards. Fits into our strategy really well. And then this brings us to our Thrift pick for this deck. And usually, first of all, for those of you who have not seen the channel before, the Thrift pick is not the card that I think is the best, right? It's not the objectively best card in the deck. Sometimes it is. But for the purposes of this designation, it's actually the card that I'm most excited to play in the deck, right? It's the card that when I see it in my hand, this is what I'm pumped to be able to get out, see the effect play out, and see what it happens, with the table. However, for this deck, we're going to do something a little bit differently. Because, as I mentioned, this is a super fun toolbox deck, right? Where each creature has its own ability, has its own payoff, and it's something that we'll be excited to see. But I want to walk you through exactly what I mean by when I'm super excited to see some of these cards play out. So I actually have 3 cards here, and we're going to kind of go through a scenario here, right? It's your turn. You've got all 3 of these cards in your graveyard, right? You've got Lazav out. So you have access to these, and now you do need 13 mana for this. So it's not a cheap thing to come off, right? But 13 mana late game is not an absurd amount. We've got plenty of mana rocks here. We should be able to have access to that. But when combat begins, you activate Lazav and turn him into the Elder Brain, right? And so that when he attacks, you steal somebody's hand, right? You get that attack trigger for the Elder Brain. However, after attackers are declared and before you go to blocks, you activate Lazav again and target the Slither Blade that's in your graveyard, which is the 1 mana 1/2 Naga Rogue. It can't be blocked. So not only have you gotten the attack trigger from the Elder Brain, now that we've resolved that trigger, now Lazav is unblockable. And so can't be blocked. Blocker step is passed, declared. No blocks are declared in Lazav because he can't be blocked. And then before damage, you pay 5 and turn Lazav into the Raving Dead. And he deals combat damage to the player, loses half their life. So in the space of 3 cards in 1 combat, you've stolen a player's hand, you've made your unblockable commander be able to deal half a player's life total in terms of damage. This is what I'm saying when I love the idea of being able to pick and choose when we activate these abilities to get these effects, to have this impact on the game. That's what I'm really excited to be able to do with this deck. And that brings us to the end. I hope you guys enjoyed. I got to see a little bit into my creativity here. Again, really excited to see how all of these things interact. It's going to be a different game every single time. But I hope you guys enjoyed. As always, if you can think of some cards that I missed, might have, looked over in my research, please let me know. Put it down in the comments. I love learning a little bit from your guys' perspective. As always, please hit that subscribe button. Share this video with some friends. And as always, take care and stay thrifty.